What's up guys, this is Danny from Rethink P2P Lending. Welcome back to another video on my channel. As you saw in my previous portfolio update, I recently managed to exceed an outstanding peer-to-peer portfolio worth 100,000 euros. As many of my international viewers probably don't know exactly who I am and how I got to this point, I decided to prepare a small summary of my peer-to-peer lending journey in the past 7 years and how I got to this point right here. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. In order to understand my background a bit better, we have to go back to January 2014 when I started off with my first official corporate job after graduating from university. Due to my passion for print publications, as you can see me here with the first issue of my very own magazine DNP, I started my career at an English publishing house in London where I was responsible for acquiring advertising clients in the German market. During this time, I did not only learn the harsh reality of how difficult it is to actually sell advertorials via cold calling, but also how hard you have to work in order to get your paycheck. And because I was working so hard for my money, I was then looking for ways on how to avoid inflation and maintain as much purchasing power as possible. The problem, I had no idea where and how I could invest my money profitably. Nowadays, well-known neo-brokers have just started out and there have only been limited resources online on how to invest and manage your assets properly. From today's perspective, that may sound a bit hard to imagine, but for me personally, the stock market appeared like somewhat a parallel universe without any access to it. And because I couldn't get ahead of this topic, I then decided to just let go and focus on something else instead. In a way, I still follow this approach to date, in a sense that I am not investing in something which I don't fully understand, either because the topic is too complex or simply because I just don't have the brains for it. For this reason, I might have missed some early adopter stages, like with Bitcoin, but at the same time, I have also never jumped on any hyped FOMO trains such as NFTs. My very first real investment has therefore been a real estate property, which is located on the outskirts of Berlin, with the purchasing agreement being signed in December 2016. To this day, the property serves me as a good cash flow machine and as a possible retreat should I ever decide to return to Germany. Only a few months later, I started my very first peer-to-peer investment in October 2017 after I attended an online course about passive income. Immediately, I got excited about this topic for various reasons. Firstly, the underlying business model of those platforms made sense to me. Secondly, because the entry barrier for investing seemed extremely low. And thirdly, because the promoted double-digit returns appeared pretty tempting as well. After reading up on the topic for a few weeks, I finally made my first peer-to-peer investment in October 2017 by depositing 2,000 euros each with Mintos and Bondora. As a beginner, it is important to get started quickly and move from theory to practice as soon as possible. Now, in terms of my personal peer-to-peer lending experience, this has worked quite well for me at first, whereas my initial greed for high returns has cost me big time down the line. Instead of taking it slow and grow my exposure on Bondora Portfolio Pro organically, I invested already 14,000 euros within 12 months, blinded by the initially very high returns of between 15 and 24%. Although I got lucky 7 years later by withdrawing 14,200 euros from this investment product by now, my total return of currently 1.39% is still the lowest I have ever had in my entire peer-to-peer lending journey. On the other hand, I experienced my biggest career turning point in April 2018 when I was dismissed without notice following a dispute I had with my employer at the time. This has been an event which left a lasting impression on me and something that kept my head busy for quite some time afterwards. At this point, only one thing was certain for me: a return to the corporate world was out of question. On one side, I wanted to become more independent by the decisions of external parties, while on the other side, I couldn't get back to a sales job where passion, belief, and credibility are fundamental pillars to be successful. All of these aspects seemed difficult for me to attain, which is why a clear cut and a fundamental change needed to happen. For this reason, I spent a lot of time in summer of 2018 to reflect on the previous years, trying to figure out a new professional direction. Due to an increasing focus on my financial situation, I realized that understanding finances is the main key to achieve more independency and living a more self-determined life. Therefore, I researched a lot more about the topic of peer-to-peer lending, and somehow the idea emerged to publish a book on this topic. A few weeks later, I somehow got lucky by winning a lot from a German peer-to-peer blogger during October of 2018, which led to my very first ever visit to the Baltic states. This trip was sponsored by Estate Guru, which celebrated its 5th birthday at the time. During our stay, we also had a chance to meet up with Bondora CEO Pertl Tomberg, where I was able to ask him a few questions in person regarding my book project. Following this trip to Tallinn, I became convinced to not only publish a book on peer-to-peer lending, but instead launch an entire blog which focuses on the topic of peer-to-peer. At the time, peer-to-peer lending has been a very popular topic across many German-speaking finance channels. What I personally found lacking, however, was the depth of their content. Many blogs were primarily reporting about the AI settings, explanations of the buyback guarantee, and the occasional interview with some platform executive. From this position, I wanted to establish a blog that was providing more in-depth content as well as critical and detailed analysis on the peer-to-peer lending topic. My domain was then registered on December 19th, 2018, while my first YouTube video went online on January 8th, 2019. 2019 marked the official start of Rethink Peer-to-Peer. At the start, I posted at least one new article and one new video every week to provide some background information on the peer-to-peer lending industry. The reception of my content has been pretty popular at the very beginning, even though the production quality of my videos has been pretty embarrassing, to say the least. This included PowerPoint presentations that have been recorded via desktop with words being underlined in red by the spell checker, as well as completely overexposed or underexposed camera settings. So overall, a pretty rough approach, which makes it hard for me to rewatch these videos nowadays, but at least I got my content out, which apparently hit a nerve for many investors. When I think of 2019, I have very fond memories when it comes to my trips to the Baltic states, of which there have been 3 in total that year. The first one happened in March, where I spent a full week traveling in Latvia and Lithuania. The platforms that I have visited back then were Mintos, Twino, Groupier, Via Invest, Debitum Network, and Neo Finance. I also invested in 5 of those 6 peer-to-peer platforms at one point in the past, with Groupier being the only exception which never made it to my portfolio. In June, I attended the first and to date also last exhibition of the peer-to-peer conference in Riga. Overall, a great opportunity to network on site with a variety of platforms and decision makers from the industry, while getting to know a few colleagues from the publisher side as well. Even a few friendships came up from this trip with people that I am still having close contact with today. The last trip of 2019 took place in November when I attended the FinTech In conference in Vilnius. At this occasion, I even managed to visit the Central Bank of Lithuania while asking a few questions to their director about regulating the peer-to-peer industry. Some events that have happened that year in Germany are also worth mentioning. Firstly, a finance conference in Hamburg, which ended up in late-night discussions about how much belly a frugal society can actually tolerate. And secondly, also the only 2 offline meetings of the Rethink peer-to-peer community took place in 2019. A great experience that I still remember very fondly, as they gave me an even better understanding for the people behind the blog views, likes, comments, and YouTube subscriptions. In hindsight, it was obviously a great decision to travel this much in 2019, as those opportunities have been quite limited just a few months later. In January 2020, the value of my outstanding peer-to-peer portfolio increased to above 80,000 euros for the first time, a mark that I wouldn't see again until 3.5 years later. While the pandemic spread in the first quarter of 2020 and completely turned many people's lives upside down, I decided to put the brakes on my peer-to-peer investments. In particular, I decided to liquidate my almost 40,000 euro position in Bondora Go and Grow to invest the money in the falling stock markets. Although it felt wrong and counterproductive to invest at this point in time, fortunately my rational approach, long-term thinking and my personal convictions prevailed. Interestingly enough, not everyone approached the situation like I did and relocated assets at the time, which was leading to a few influencers arguing online that my actions were a result of lacking conviction and knowledge. The peak happened with a German YouTuber calling me out as a wannabe peer-to-peer policeman, which helped me to create some new marketing materials while countering content-wise with a logical explanation why peer-to-peer investments are not suited for a classic buy and hold strategy. A more severe topic for me has been the financial outlook at the time. Not only was there no money in the market, my personal reasoning to stay away from peer-to-peer lending at the time being has also contributed to my financial drought. I had realized that I couldn't survive this situation forever and continue in this way and form. But instead of selling my principles and convictions, considering that I have received some shady promotion offers at the time, I decided to simply deliver the best possible content week in, week out to support my community as best as I could during this difficult time. In hindsight, I am glad the situation became somewhat stable towards the end of 2020. What remained from this time are many German bloggers and YouTubers who quit their online exposure on peer-to-peer lending during this time. My hope was that many investors would remember and recognize who tried to report honestly and truthfully about the situation, whereby the primary interest was not necessarily their own wallet. And when I look back at the developments in recent years, I have a feeling that many people do. To be honest, the years after the pandemic have passed quite quickly for me. Moving away from Berlin at the end of 2021 was a significant step for me, as was the associated deregistration from Germany. Out of the comfort zone and right into the world, which for instance got me to stay for 3 months in South America this year alone. Moving away from Germany has also led me to relocate my business abroad, which fittingly happened to be in Estonia, where I managed to get an e-residency citizenship. In recent years, I have often considered to broaden the content scope of my channels, whereas ultimately I have always decided against it to not dilute the focus of my content. Instead, my focus has recently been on geographical expansion. At the beginning of 2023, an English interface has been introduced on my blog in combination with an English YouTube channel. At the beginning of 2024, I even added a Spanish interface to my blog as well. Although coordinating these channels is not an easy task, at least it offers an interesting challenge that keeps a certain degree of variety in my otherwise rather monotonous existence as a financial blogger. Thankfully, also traveling to the Baltic states again has recently provided a bit more variety. After spending a week in Tallinn in September of 2022, my biggest trip to the Baltic states to date followed in June 2024. In 35 days, I visited almost 20 different peer-to-peer platforms, lenders and other stakeholders, while exchanging ideas with some decision makers from the peer-to-peer lending industry. Even though the extent of this trip was quite intensive and demanding, I hope there will be more exciting on-site encounters to come in the future. To conclude this video, I would like to give a brief outline of the status quo and how things will continue in the future. Looking back, I made my first P2P investment in October of 2017, while my first YouTube video went online in January of 2019. This means that a large part of my journey in the P2P industry has been publicly visible. Thanks to my monthly portfolio updates, investors were also able to see very transparent when, how, and why I facilitated certain transactions at any time. To be fair, my opinions and assessments were not always correct. Sometimes I was wrong, I leaned too far out of the window or offended other people. The intention was never malicious though, but instead always driven by the conviction to establish more justice and a better quality standard in the industry. Even if I have, admittedly, sometimes overstepped the mark. Fortunately, I made far more positive and good decisions in the end, which hopefully enabled many retail investors to achieve a very decent return from their P2P investments as well. Even if some lender defaults still need to be resolved, there was never a completely black platform sheep in my portfolio, which I believe only if you can say with a similar track record like myself. So what happens next? In all honesty, this is a really tough and difficult question to which I don't really have an answer right now. I don't want to make unattainable promises or spread artificial fear about a possible departure. The continuation of Rethink Peer-to-Peer will largely depend on whether I can live up to my personal standards in content creation, if there will be an audience for my content, and whether the economic conditions fit into the overall picture as well. If these three factors align and come together nicely, I hope that I can continue with this job for many years to come. Up to this point, I would like to say a big thank you to all my loyal readers, viewers, and community members who have followed me throughout these years and who supported me either actively or passively, so I was able to keep growing this project. Without any of you, there would be no Rethink Peer-to-Peer today. So thank you very much for your loyalty, your trust, and your support.